Zariah stepped into the bank's lobby, the sound of her heels sharp against the marble, drawing brief, curious glances from the staff. The floor's shine was almost blinding, but it reflected only the ceiling and the rows of empty chairs, never the woman who walked with quiet purpose. At the reception desk, the attendant's smile was tight, her words clipped. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, eyes darting to the next person in line. Zariah nodded, her grip tightening on the folder in her hand. "With Mr. Hargrove?" she replied, voice steady. The receptionist's gaze lingered on Zariah's face for a heartbeat, then flicked away as she checked the schedule. "You can wait over there," she said, motioning to the row of seats by the window. As Zariah sat, she felt the weight of the room shift. A teller whispered to a colleague, both glancing her way before returning to their screens. A manager in a navy suit walked briskly by, his eyes sliding over Zariah as if she were invisible. The hum of the printer and the tap of keyboards filled the silence, but Zariah's presence seemed to pull at the edges of the space, creating a tension that no one acknowledged but everyone felt. The bank's walls, lined with portraits of past executives and gold-lettered slogans about opportunity, seemed to press in, their promises ringing hollow in the heavy air. A white man in a tailored suit entered, greeted by name, ushered past, the line with a handshake and a friendly laugh. Zariah watched, her jaw set, her eyes following the exchange with a quiet, simmering determination. She straightened her back and waited, every second a reminder of the boundaries drawn in this place. When the receptionist finally called her name, her tone was flat, almost bored. Zariah rose, folder in hand, and walked toward the office doors, her entrance unnoticed by most but her resolve clear as glass. Martin Hargrove's office was a study in self-importance. Gold pens lined up perfectly on his desk, family portraits angled toward the door, and a leather chair creaked as he leaned back, sizing up Zariah before she even sat down. He extended his hand, the shake brief and limp, his eyes already scanning her folder instead of meeting her gaze. "So, you're here for a business loan," he said, his tone somewhere between amusement and dismissal. Zariah nodded, her voice calm. "Yes, I have all my documents ready." Martin barely glanced at the paperwork, instead picking up one of his gold pens and twirling it between his fingers. He flipped through her application with a practiced indifference, pausing only to raise an eyebrow at a number or a line he found questionable. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "You know," Martin finally said, his lips curling into a tight smile, "we have very high standards here. Not everyone is a fit for our portfolio." Zariah held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm aware of your requirements. I've met everyone." Martin's eyes flicked up, a hint of surprise quickly masked by another wave of condescension. A junior staff member entered, to drop off a file, her hands shaking slightly as she set it on the desk. Martin didn't acknowledge her, his attention fixed on Zariah's application. "I'll review this," he said, but the decision was already written in his posture. He set her folder aside, reaching for another gold pen as if to signal the meeting was over. Zariah stood, her movements measured. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice even. Martin offered a perfunctory nod, already turning his chair away. As Zariah left, the gold pens gleamed on the desk, silent witnesses to another door quietly closing. The stamp landed with a dull thud, red ink bleeding across the top of Zariah's application. Martin didn't look up as he pressed the denial. Marked down, his focus already shifting to the next folder in his stack. Zariah watched the motion, her jaw clenched, her hands tightening around the edge of the desk. The rejection was routine for him, another decision made without thought. But for her it was a door slammed shut, one she'd seen close too many times before. Martin slid the folder back toward her, his voice flat. "I'm afraid this isn't going to work out. Maybe try a smaller bank." He didn't bother to soften the blow. Zariah's eyes flicked to the stamp, then back to Martin's face. She stayed silent, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. A clock ticked somewhere behind her, each second stretching the moment. The junior staff member from earlier hovered in the doorway, her face pale as she watched the exchange. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it and slipped away. Zariah gathered her documents, moving slowly, refusing to rush. The denial letter was still wet with ink, smudging slightly as she slid it into her folder. Martin cleared his throat, already reaching for his next file. "We have to be careful with our investments," he said, not meeting her eyes. Zariah stood, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for your consideration," she replied, voice steady. She turned to leave, her footsteps measured, the weight of the denial heavy but not crushing. As she reached the door, she paused, glancing back at Martin. He was already engrossed in paperwork, the denial just another mark on his ledger. Zariah walked out, the sting of rejection burning, but her dignity intact. The bank's walls seemed to close in behind her, but she kept her head high, determined not to let this be the end of her story. Before the story continues, please let us know from where you are watching this video. Write your city or country in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you believe in stories that challenge injustice. Your engagement gives power to voices that need to be heard. Martin's eyes lingered on Zariah as she gathered her things, a faint curl at the edge of his lips. He leaned back, arms folded, watching her with a gaze that weighed more than his words ever could. "You know," he said, pausing as if searching for the right phrase, "we don't usually see applicants like you at this branch." The words hung between them, sharp and deliberate. Zariah met his stare, unblinking. "Applicants like me?" she echoed, her voice low, refusing to let the insult land. He shrugged, feigning innocence. "We're a very traditional institution. Most of our clients have been with us for years. It's just unusual." His tone was casual, but the message was clear. The receptionist, overhearing from her desk, shifted in her seat, her fingers drumming nervously on the keyboard. A teller nearby glanced up, eyes darting between Martin and Zariah, then quickly returned to her paperwork. Zariah's face remained calm, her posture unyielding. She refused to let the moment unravel her. "Maybe it's time for something different," she replied, her words measured, her dignity intact. Martin's expression faltered for a split second before he forced another tight smile. "Of course," he replied, but his voice had lost its edge. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. She turned to leave, her steps slow and deliberate. The receptionist's eyes followed her, a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. The teller, still, pretending to focus on her work, let out a quiet breath. Martin watched Zariah go, his confidence shaken, his authority suddenly less certain. Zariah walked out, her restraint her greatest weapon, leaving behind a room full of people who would remember the way she didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't give them the reaction they expected. She let the door close softly behind her, echoing a quiet promise that she would not be diminished. Zariah paused at the threshold, folder tucked beneath her arm, and glanced back at the lobby. Martin stood in his office doorway, arms crossed, his lips pressed into a thin line. He expected her to leave defeated, shoulders slumped, but instead she offered a small, knowing smile, one that didn't reach her eyes but said everything she needed. The receptionist caught it, her own face softening as if she understood something had shifted. "Thank you for your time," Zariah said, her voice smooth, never rising above the hum of the room. Martin nodded, but there was an unease in the way he gripped the door frame, knuckles whitening. The staff watched, pretending to be busy, but their eyes followed her as she moved toward the exit. A janitor paused with his mop, offering a brief respectful nod as she passed. Zariah returned it, her chin lifted, her steps measured and unhurried. Outside, the glass doors reflected the world behind her, a world that wanted her to shrink. She stood for a moment, breathing in the cool air, feeling the weight of every closed door she'd ever encountered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Tasha. "How did it go?" Zariah typed back. As expected. But it's not over. She slipped her phone away, her resolve hardening. Inside, Martin turned away, missing the moment his own reflection looked smaller than before. The receptionist watched Zariah disappear down the steps, a new uncertainty settling in her posture. The bank's routine resumed, but the tension lingered, a quiet warning that something had changed. Zariah walked down the sidewalk, her smile fading into a look of fierce determination. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the air was charged with its promise. She would not be erased, not this time. In the small kitchen of her childhood home, Zariah watched her mother knead dough by the light of a flickering open sign in the window. The bakery's sweet aroma couldn't mask the tension in the air. Her father sat at the table, turning, a layoff notice over and over in his hands, the paper already creased from worry. "We'll get by," he said, voice thin, trying to sound certain for Zariah's sake. She nodded, but the doubt in his eyes lingered with her for years. At school, teachers called on her less and less. "You're quiet, Zariah. You should speak." "Up more," one said, not noticing how often her hand was raised. The landlord raised the rent every spring, never offering a reason. Her mother counted cash at the kitchen table, lips pressed tight, stretching every dollar. "We just need one good month," she'd whisper. But the good months never came. Zariah remembered watching her parents fill out loan applications, each form more complicated than the last. Her mother's handwriting was careful, hopeful. The bank's responses were always the same. "Unfortunately, we cannot approve your request at this time." The envelopes piled up in a drawer, never discussed but never thrown away. Zariah learned early that some doors stayed closed, no matter how hard you knocked. One evening she overheard her parents talking in low voices. "They don't want people like us to get ahead," her father said, frustration spilling out. Her mother squeezed his hand, silent agreement passing between them. Zariah sat on the stairs, memorizing every word, every sigh. She promised herself that, when she grew up, she'd find a way to break the cycle. The memory of those nights, the weight of all those closed doors, became the fuel for every step she took forward. Tasha slumped into the cafe booth, her shoulders hunched as she stirred her coffee, eyes fixed on the swirling cream. Zariah slid into the seat across from her, waiting. Tasha's voice was barely above a whisper. He asked for 3 forms of ID. 3. Then he just smiled and said, "Maybe tomorrow, Miss Bennett." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. "Like I was asking for a favor, not a loan I earned." Zariah reached across the table, her hand steady. "Did you say anything?" Tasha's eyes flicked up, glassy with frustration. "What was I supposed to say? He was already looking past me like I was wasting his time." She traced the rim of her mug, knuckles white. "I saw him help the woman before me. She forgot her paperwork, and he still let her through. But me? He just wanted me gone." The cafe was filled with the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation, but at their table the world shrank to a heavy, shared silence. Zariah's jaw tightened. "You're not alone, Tasha. They do it to all of us." Tasha nodded, but the words didn't ease the sting. "I just wanted to open my own salon. That's it. Why is it always so hard?" A server passed by, offering a refill. Tasha shook her head, her fingers trembling as she pushed her cup away. "I keep thinking maybe if I dress differently, talk differently, they'll treat me like I belong." Zariah leaned in, her voice fierce but quiet. "You belong. They're the ones who need to change." Tasha managed a small smile, but her eyes stayed sad. The two friends sat together, their silence thick with understanding, the weight of a system pressing down on both of them, reminding them that the walls were high, but not unbreakable. Mr. Otis left his resignation letter on the break room table, folded neatly beside a battered thermos and a ring of keys. The cleaning crew found it first, their laughter fading as they read the words. 30 years cleaning up after you. 30 years, same faces in the boardroom. Not once did I see someone who looked like me in a suit. The letter was short, written in careful script, but it hit harder than any speech. In the early morning, Mr. Otis moved quietly through the empty corridors, his cart rolling over the same tiles he'd polished since before most of the staff were born. He paused outside the executive suite, glancing at the row of framed portraits, every one of them white, every one of them smiling. He shook his head, the weight of decades settling on his shoulders. A junior analyst, arriving early, caught his eye and offered a hesitant nod. Mr. Otis nodded back, his expression kind but tired. Later, as word spread, the staff gathered in the lounge, reading the letter aloud. Some shook their heads, others exchanged guilty glances. "He's right," whispered a teller, her voice barely audible. "It's always been this way." The branch manager walked in, scanning the room, but said nothing. He picked up the letter, read it, and set it back down, his face unreadable. Mr. Otis's mop leaned against the wall outside the executive office, a quiet act of defiance. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. Instead, he walked out the front doors. As the sun rose, the city just beginning to wake. The cleaning crew watched him go, their respect clear in the way they stood a little straighter. The letter stayed on the table all day, a silent protest echoing in every corner of the building. A reminder that even the quietest voices can leave a mark that's impossible to erase. A shaky phone video started it all. The clip showed a young, black entrepreneur at the counter, voice steady as he slid his business plan across the desk. The loan officer barely glanced at the paperwork, her fingers tapping impatiently. "We'll call you," she said, eyes already moving to the next client. A white man in a suit, greeted with a handshake and a warm smile. The camera caught the entrepreneur's jaw clench, his lips pressed tight as he gathered his documents, and left. Within hours, the video was everywhere. The hashtag #BankingWhileBlack trended on every platform. Comments poured in, stories of denied loans, closed accounts, and polite excuses that always meant the same thing. "Happened to me last month," wrote one user. "They said my numbers didn't add up, but I know what it was." Another posted, "3 generations in this city and still treated like a stranger at the bank." Zariah watched the video on her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She recognized the look in the entrepreneur's eyes, the mix of anger and resignation, the way hope slipped away in real time. Her group chat lit up with messages. Tasha sent a string of fire emojis. Mr. Otis, now retired, simply wrote, "About time people saw it." The bank's social media manager scrambled to respond, posting a statement about commitment to diversity. The comments section exploded, customers demanding real answers, not empty slogans. Inside the branch, staff whispered in the break room, their glances uneasy. The branch manager called an emergency meeting, voice tight as he read from a prepared statement. But the damage was done. The video looped on news broadcasts, the hashtag scrolling beneath anchors' faces. For the first time, the bank's polished image cracked, the truth too loud to ignore. Zariah closed her phone, her resolve sharpening. The world was finally watching, and she was ready to make them see even more. Zariah sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, a stack of old files and printouts beside her. She scrolled through months of digital archives, eyes narrowing as she read complaint after complaint. Each one told a familiar story. Denied despite perfect credit. No follow-up after my meeting. Was told to try a smaller branch. The dates stretched back years, the names different but the pattern unmistakable. She clicked through emails marked read, but never answered, each message a plea for fairness that vanished into the void. She printed out a handful, spreading them across the table. The language was always the same, polite but dismissive, full of phrases like "unfortunately" and "after careful review." Zariah highlighted the most glaring examples, her pen moving quickly. She found a letter from a small business owner, her words shaky but determined. "I've banked here for 20 years. I just want the same chance as everyone else." Response was a form letter, unsigned. As the pile grew, Zariah's frustration deepened. She called Tasha, her voice tight. "It's all here. They've been doing this for years." Tasha sighed on the other end. "They count on us giving up." "Most people do." Zariah shook her head, determination hardening. Not this time. The next morning she carried the stack of evidence into the branch, sliding it across the counter to the branch manager. He glanced at the top page, his jaw tightening. "We take these concerns seriously," he said, but his eyes darted to the security guard as if looking for backup. Zariah didn't flinch. "I want answers. And I want change." The manager nodded, but his hands fidgeted with a pen, betraying his discomfort. As Zariah left, the staff exchanged uneasy looks. The complaints were no longer buried. They were out in the open, impossible to ignore. The paper trail, once hidden, now threatened to unravel everything the bank had tried to keep quiet. Zariah sat across from a friend in her living room, spreadsheets open on her laptop, the glow of the screen painting her face in cold light. She scrolled through the bank's public records, her eyes catching the same phrases over and over. "Application incomplete. Does not meet lending criteria. Outside our risk tolerance." She clicked a tab labeled Loan Outcomes, and the numbers told their own story. Nearly every denial was attached to a black or brown applicant, the approvals almost all white. Her friend Malik leaned in, frowning. "You see what I'm seeing?" Zariah nodded, jaw tight. "It's not random. It's him." She pulled up Martin's digital signature on dozens of files, the same abrupt notes in the margin. Not a fit. Too risky. Insufficient collateral. Malik shook his head, anger simmering. "He's got it down to a routine." They printed the most damning examples, spreading them across the coffee table. Zariah's pen circled the patterns, connecting the dots with red ink. "This isn't just bias, it's a system. He's been doing this for years, and nobody's stopped him." Malik tapped a denial letter, voice low. "He probably thinks no one's paying attention." Zariah's eyes flashed. "He's wrong." Later she emailed the evidence to a local reporter attaching a summary of her findings. The reply came, quickly. "This is huge, let's talk." Zariah leaned back, exhaustion and hope warring in her chest. She knew the risk. Martin was powerful, and the bank would protect him. But the numbers were undeniable, the pattern too clear to explain away. The next day, Martin sat in his office reviewing another stack of applications. He paused, frowning at the sudden influx of inquiries about his approval rates. For the first time, his routine felt exposed. Zariah watched from afar, knowing the walls around him were starting to crack, one denial at a time. The boardroom was a fortress of polished wood and cold eyes. The annual meeting had begun, but the air was thick, with unspoken tension. A junior analyst, Jordan, sat near the back, his fingers nervously tapping a file against his knee. He glanced sideways at his colleague, Denise, who sat rigid, her gaze fixed on the all-white panel at the front. "They'll never let her in," Jordan whispered, barely audible, his voice a mix of frustration and resignation. Denise nodded, subtly, sliding a thin folder toward him. A small act of defiance in a room steeped in tradition and silence. Around them, the board members exchanged glances, their faces masks of polite disinterest. Evelyn Drake, the chair, adjusted her glasses, her eyes flickering with a hint of unease. Samuel Price cleared his throat, breaking the quiet, but his words were carefully measured, avoiding any direct confrontation. The room felt smaller, the weight of history pressing down. The same faces, the same rules, the same barriers that had kept change at bay for decades. Yet beneath the surface, a current of unrest stirred, subtle but growing. Zariah's name was mentioned in hushed tones, a ripple through the room. Some shifted uncomfortably, others exchanged quick knowing looks. The junior analyst's file contained evidence that could not be ignored, and the quiet rebellion it sparked was the first crack in the bank's polished facade. As the meeting progressed, the whispers grew louder, the walls that had once seemed impenetrable beginning to show signs of fracture. The old order was not yet broken, but the foundation was trembling. The scene closed on Jordan's determined gaze, a silent promise that the fight was far from over. Denise shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the folder. She caught Jordan's eye, a flicker of hope passing between them. The room's cold veneer was cracking, and the first whispers of transformation stirred beneath the surface. Martin leaned back in his office chair, the leather creaking as he surveyed the branch floor through the glass wall. A teller approached with a folder, pausing at his door. "There's a family at desk 3 asking about a loan," she said, her voice careful. Martin didn't look up. "We don't take unnecessary risks," he replied, his tone clipped, eyes fixed on his computer screen. The teller hesitated, her grip tightening on the folder. "Their paperwork all in order," she offered, but Martin waved her off, dismissing the concern with a flick of his hand. Across the lobby, the Black family sat quietly, hopeful yet guarded. The father checked his watch, the mother smoothed her daughter's hair. The teller returned, her steps slower, her expression troubled. She glanced at her colleague, Marcus, who raised his eyebrows in silent question. She shook her head, lips pressed together, and filed the folder away. Martin's words echoed, not just in the teller's mind, but throughout the branch. Staff exchanged glances, some uneasy, others resigned. Marcus leaned over to whisper, "It's always the same story." The teller nodded, frustration flickering in her eyes. "He never even met them," she replied, voice barely above a breath. In the break room, conversation turned to Martin's decision. "He says it's about risk, but we all know what that means," one employee muttered. Another shrugged. "It's not our call." The weight of the bias hung heavy, unspoken, but understood by everyone. As the family left, their faces fell, hope replaced by disappointment. The daughter looked back once, her small hand waving goodbye to the teller, who managed a weak smile in return. Martin closed another file, never glancing up, his routine unchanged. But the staff felt the shift, the growing discomfort with every coded phrase and every opportunity denied. The cracks in the system deepened, one quiet moment at a time. Zariah sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop casting shadows across the room. Her hands trembled as she opened the anonymous email. Subject line, "You need to see this." Attached were training slides from the bank's internal files. She clicked through, her breath catching at the images. Smiling white men in suits, labeled "Ideal Client." Lists of risk factors circled in red. Locks, hijabs, foreign accents. Each slide was a blueprint for exclusion. The language clinical, but the message unmistakable. She forwarded the files to Tasha, her message brief. "Proof." Tasha called within minutes, her voice shaking with anger. "They put it in writing. They actually put it in writing." Zariah nodded, though Tasha couldn't see her. "This is how they keep us out," she replied, her voice steady. Meanwhile, at the branch, whispers spread fast. A junior analyst, Jordan, printed a copy and slipped it to Denise in the break room. Denise scanned the pages, her jaw tightening. "This is bad," she murmured. Jordan glanced around, lowering his voice. "We can't ignore it anymore." The next morning, the document surfaced online, shared by an anonymous account. The reaction was immediate. Staff huddled in corners, phones in hand, reading the slides in shock and disbelief. The branch manager called an emergency meeting, his face pale as he tried to explain. "These materials do not reflect our values," he insisted, but the staff's skepticism was obvious. Marcus, the security guard, crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Looks like it's been your values for a while," he muttered. Zariah watched the fallout unfold, her resolve hardening. The truth was out now, impossible to deny. The bank's carefully crafted image was shattered by its own words, and the community was paying attention. For the first time, the rules were exposed for everyone to see, and no one could look away. The footage played on a small monitor in the back office, the grainy images looping in silence. Zariah and Denise watched, side by side, their faces lit by the flicker of the screen. In one clip, Martin greeted a white businessman with a broad smile, rising from his chair to shake hands and offer coffee. The next clip showed a black woman approaching the desk, paperwork in hand. Martin barely looked up, his posture stiff. His tone clipped as he gestured for her to sit. Denise leaned forward, her voice tight. He doesn't even try to hide it. Zariah nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. It's all here, every time. The next sequence showed a young Latino couple. Martin's expression was cold, his questions rapid-fire and impatient. The contrast was undeniable. In the staff lounge, Jordan replayed the footage for Marcus and a few others. Marcus shook his head, arms folded. "I've seen it, we all have, just never like this." Another teller, Samira, watched in silence, her lips pressed together, a flicker of pain in her eyes. "It's not just Martin," she whispered. "It's the whole system." Word spread quickly through the branch. Employees gathered in small groups, watching the footage on their phones, sharing quiet conversations. The mood shifted: anger, disbelief, and a growing sense of responsibility. The branch manager called a meeting, his voice strained. "We need to address these concerns," he said, but no one looked convinced. Zariah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every denied handshake, every cold glance. Denise squeezed her shoulder, a silent show of support. "You're not alone in this," she said. Zariah nodded, her resolve sharpening. The evidence was undeniable now, the truth looping on every screen. The days of pretending not to see were over. Zariah unlocked the door to a small storefront on Main Street, the paint still fresh on the sign above. Community First Investment. She paused for a moment, taking in the empty space, the scuffed floors, the sunlight streaming through dusty windows. Tasha arrived first, carrying a box of flyers. "You really did it," she whispered, pride and disbelief mingling in her voice. One by one, neighbors filed in, a barber in a faded apron, a teacher with a stack of lesson plans, a single mother, balancing a toddler on her hip. Each person brought their hopes and plans, clutching folders and envelopes. Zariah greeted them all with a handshake and a smile, her confidence contagious. "We're here to help each other," she said, her voice steady. "No one gets turned away." At the folding table, Zariah reviewed applications, her red approved stamp ready. The barber slid his paperwork across, hands trembling. "I've been denied so many times," he admitted. Zariah looked him in the eye. "Not here." She stamped his form, the sound echoing in the quiet room. The teacher's eyes filled with tears as Zariah nodded at her proposal. "You're building something important," Zariah said, her encouragement genuine. Tasha managed the waiting list, jotting down names and offering reassurance. "You're next," she told a nervous woman, her tone warm. The atmosphere buzzed with hope and possibility, a stark contrast to the cold indifference of the bank. Marcus, stopping by on his lunch break, grinned as he saw the line out the door. "Word's getting around," he said. Zariah smiled back, determination shining in her eyes. By day's end, the stamp had left a trail of approved dreams. The community gathered outside, sharing stories and laughter. Zariah locked up, exhaustion and satisfaction mingling as she looked at the sign one more time. She knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time, the future felt wide, open. The mail arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, the handwriting unfamiliar. Zariah opened it at her kitchen table, Tasha leaning over her shoulder. Inside was a cashier's check for $250,000 and a slip of paper with just 3 words: "Burn it down." Tasha started, eyes wide. "Who?" Zariah shook her head, a slow smile spreading. "Someone who believes." The next morning, Zariah marched into the brokerage office, the check clutched tight. The agent, a middle-aged man with skeptical eyes, glanced at the amount and raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure about this?" Zariah nodded, her voice unwavering. Buy as many shares of First Meridian as this will get. He hesitated, then nodded, processing the order. News traveled fast. Maya Lin, the local reporter, called before lunch. You're making moves, she said, her tone a mix of admiration and curiosity. Zariah kept it simple. It's not just me. The community's tired of waiting. Maya's headline the next morning read, The System's Architect Becomes its Target. The story spread, picked up by bigger outlets. In the staff lounge, Denise read the article aloud, her voice shaking with excitement. She's coming for them, Marcus said, a grin breaking through his usual reserve. Martin sat in his office, scrolling through the news, his face paling as he saw the bank's stock price drop. He called the branch manager, voice tight. Find out who's buying. The manager stammered. It's a mix. Small investors, community funds, some anonymous. Martin slammed the phone down, frustration boiling over. Zariah watched the numbers climb, her resolve hardening. The check was more than money. It was a signal, a rallying cry. Tasha hugged her, whispering, You're changing everything. Zariah squeezed her friend's hand, determination burning in her chest. The revolution had always been quiet, but now it was unstoppable, fueled by allies she might never meet. The boardroom was flooded with harsh morning light, every surface gleaming, every flaw exposed. Zariah entered with her team, her steps measured, her gaze unwavering. The directors sat around the glass table, papers stacked neatly, pens poised. Martin adjusted his tie, sweat beading at his hairline, his usual confidence replaced by a restless energy. He didn't greet Zariah, just nodded stiffly, lips pressed tight. Evelyn Drake, the chairwoman, broke the tension first. Ms. Caldwell, you've requested time to address the board? Her voice was formal, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. Zariah nodded, sliding a folder across the table. Thank you for making space for me. I believe you'll want to see this. Martin shifted in his seat, glancing at the documents but not touching them. Samuel Price, legal counsel, cleared his throat, his hand trembling slightly as he flipped the folder open. These are recent acquisitions? He asked, voice uncertain. Zariah's answer was calm. Yes, my group now holds a controlling interest. A ripple moved through the room. Denise, seated near the end, shot a quick look at Jordan, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Martin's hands drummed on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet. This isn't how things are done, he muttered, but no one echoed him. Zariah's lawyer, a young woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. We're here to discuss the future of this institution. The community deserves a voice. The board members exchanged glances, some wary, others thoughtful. The sunlight caught the edge of the table, casting fractured patterns across their faces. For a moment, no one spoke. Zariah met Martin's gaze, steady and unflinching. He looked away, jaw clenched. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. Zariah folded her hands, waiting. The meeting had only just begun, but the outcome was already tilting in her favor. Zariah slid a stack of papers across the polished glass, her hand steady, her eyes never leaving Martin's. The directors leaned forward, curiosity and apprehension mingling in their faces. These are the share certificates for my group's holdings, she said, her voice clear. We now control the largest voting bloc in this institution. The words landed with the weight of a verdict. Martin's fingers hovered above the documents but didn't touch them. This isn't possible, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn Drake glanced at Samuel Price, who scanned the papers, his brow furrowing. It's all here, Samuel confirmed, his tone resigned. She's not exaggerating. Denise, at the far end, exchanged a quick glance with Jordan, her lips parting in a silent gasp. The tension in the room thickened, every breath measured. Martin finally spoke, his words clipped. You're not from here. You don't understand how we do things. Zariah's reply was soft but unwavering. I understand enough to know what's fair and what isn't. A director cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. What do you want, Ms. Caldwell? Zariah folded her hands, her posture relaxed but commanding. A seat at this table, a voice for everyone. You've overlooked. Her lawyer nodded in quiet support, her presence a silent anchor. Martin's composure slipped further, his jaw tightening as he realized the board was listening to her, not him. The sunlight caught the edge of the share certificates, casting a bright line across the table, a line that couldn't be erased or ignored. For a moment, no one moved. The directors weighed their options, the old rules suddenly fragile. Zariah's presence filled the room, her resolve unshakable. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was the future, and the board knew it. Maya Lin stood at the edge of the boardroom, her phone raised, the live stream icon glowing red. The chat scrolled fast, hearts, fists, words of encouragement. She's really doing it, someone typed. Zariah's voice rang out, clear and steady, every word broadcast to hundreds watching in real time. This institution belongs to the community. It's time for new leadership. The board shifted, some directors stealing glances at the camera, others trying to ignore the digital audience. Martin's face twitched as he realized the world was watching. Turn that off, he snapped, but Maya didn't move. The public deserves transparency, she replied, her tone respectful but firm. Samuel Price coughed, glancing at the screen, then at Zariah. You're making quite a statement, he said, the edge of admiration in his voice impossible to hide. Denise, sitting near the end, texted Jordan under the table. This is history, Jordan replied with a single word. Finally. The tension in the room was electric, every gesture amplified by the camera's gaze. Zariah didn't falter. We've waited long enough. Today the community takes its seat. The chat exploded. Applause, emojis, fire, words of support from people who'd never set foot in this bank, but felt the weight of the moment. Evelyn Drake tried to regain control, her voice wavering. Let's keep this professional, she urged. But the boardroom had already changed. The old order was no longer protected by closed doors or private conversations. Maya's camera caught it all, the nervous glances, the shifting alliances, the dawning realization on Martin's face that the tide had turned. As Zariah finished her statement, Maya panned the camera across the table, letting the viewers see every face. The world watched as justice unfolded, not in shouts or threats, but in calm, undeniable truth. The live stream was more than a broadcast. It was a reckoning, and no one could look away. Martin's hand hovered over the edge of the table, knuckles, pale, as Zariah's words echoed through the boardroom and out into the world. For a moment, he tried to steady himself, drawing a shallow breath. You can't do this, he said, but the words came out thin, almost pleading. The directors turned, some surprised by the tremor in his voice. Maya's camera caught his jaw tightening, the first real crack in his composure. Zariah didn't flinch. It's not just me, Mr. Hargrove. It's everyone you've counted out. Her tone was calm, but the message hit hard. Denise leaned forward, her eyes locked on Martin. Maybe it's time things changed, she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than any raised tone. Martin's gaze darted around the table, searching for support. Samuel Price looked away, suddenly fascinated by the papers in front of him. Evelyn Drake pressed her lips together, uncertainty flickering across her face. Jordan, seated near the wall, met Martin's eyes, then looked down, refusing to offer the reassurance Martin so desperately needed. The room felt smaller, the air thick with expectation. Martin tried again, his voice cracking further. This isn't how we do things. There are traditions. Zariah met his stare, unwavering. Tradition doesn't mean justice. Not anymore. The words landed with finality, a quiet verdict that no one dared challenge. A long pause followed, the only sound Maya's phone buzzing with notifications. Martin's shoulders slumped, his authority slipping away in front of colleagues and strangers alike. Denise tapped her pen against her notebook, the rhythm steady, signaling a shift in the room's energy. For the first time, Martin looked uncertain, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. The boardroom, once his domain, now felt foreign. Its power no longer his to command. The fracture was visible and everyone saw it. Martin's hands hovered above the table, fingers twitching as he reached for his pen. The once steady grip was gone, replaced by a subtle shake that betrayed the storm inside him. He tried to steady himself, but the pen slipped, clattering onto the glass with a sharp tap. The sound drew every eye in the room. Evelyn Drake glanced at Martin, her expression unreadable, while Samuel Price shifted in his seat, the tension almost visible between his shoulders. Denise watched Martin's struggle, her lips pressed together, sympathy and vindication warring in her gaze. Jordan's foot tapped quietly under the table, the only sign of his nerves. Martin cleared his throat, voice barely above a whisper. "We need to maintain order," he said, but the words fell flat. His authority, once so absolute, now felt fragile. He tried to gather his papers, but they slipped from his grasp, scattering across the table. Zariah watched, silent, her posture relaxed but alert. She didn't gloat. She simply waited, letting the moment speak for itself. Maya's camera caught every detail, the way Martin's jaw clenched, the sweat beading on his brow, the way his eyes darted from face to face, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The directors exchanged glances, some with pity, others with quiet satisfaction. The old guard was faltering, and everyone knew it. Denise leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Perhaps we should hear Ms. Caldwell out." Martin looked at her, desperation flickering in his eyes, but found no support. The room was no longer his. Zariah met Martin's gaze, offering nothing but calm resolve. The power he'd wielded so easily was slipping away, undone not by shouting or scandal, but by the steady, undeniable truth. The tremor in his hands was the first visible sign of defeat, a signal that the era of unchecked control was ending. A heavy quiet settled over the boardroom as Martin tried to collect himself, his hands still unsteady. Evelyn Drake, who had always supported him in the past, cleared her throat and looked down at her notes, her loyalty wavering. Samuel Price straightened his tie, avoiding Martin's eyes, his silence louder than any rebuke. The old alliances, once so dependable, now felt brittle and uncertain. Denise broke the stillness, her voice clear but measured. "I think it's time we listen to Ms. Caldwell's proposal." She glanced around the table, searching for agreement. Jordan nodded, his support unmistakable. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Martin's circle was shrinking, his influence dissolving with every passing second. Martin opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. He looked to Evelyn for backup, but she only offered a small, apologetic shrug. The betrayal stung, visible in the way his shoulders sagged and his jaw tightened. Maya's camera caught the moment, the chat lighting up with messages. It's over for him. Finally, real change. The directors began to murmur among themselves, some leaning in to discuss quietly, others simply turning their chairs away from Martin. The sense of isolation grew, pressing in on him from all sides. Even the staff who had always followed his lead now watched him with a mix of pity and relief, grateful to see the old order fading. Zariah sat quietly, her presence commanding without a word. She didn't need to push, the board was already moving in her direction. Martin's last ally, a senior advisor, coughed and stared at the table, unwilling to intervene. The betrayal was complete, a slow, silent collapse of power that left Martin exposed and alone. The boardroom, once his stronghold, now belonged to someone else. The era of whispered agreements and closed ranks was ending, and everyone in the room could feel the difference. The air felt charged as Evelyn Drake called the board to order, her voice carrying a new authority. "We'll proceed to a vote," she announced, glancing around the table. Zariah sat upright, her gaze steady, hands folded in her lap. Martin shifted in his seat, eyes darting from face to face, searching for any sign of support. There was none. One by one the directors raised their hands. Samuel Price was first, his vote clear and unhesitating. Denise followed, her expression resolute. Jordan lifted his hand, meeting Zariah's eyes with a small nod. Even the senior advisor, who had once stood firmly by Martin, cast his vote in favor of change. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of sleeves and the faint click of pens. Evelyn marked each vote on a sheet, her pen moving with finality. "The motion passes," she declared, her tone both relieved and proud. "Ms. Caldwell, you are now chair of the board." The words hung in the air, a quiet revolution completed. Martin's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his face flushed. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but no one acknowledged him. Maya's camera caught every detail, the stunned disbelief on his face, the quiet triumph on Zariah's. The chat exploded with cheers and applause emojis, viewers from across, the city celebrating a victory that felt personal. Zariah rose, accepting the new role with a composed nod. She shook hands with each director, her gratitude sincere but measured. Denise squeezed her hand, whispering, "You earned this." Jordan smiled, relief evident in his posture. Martin lingered for a moment, then turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the hall. The boardroom, once a fortress of exclusion, was now a place of possibility. The vote was more than a decision. It was a promise that things would never return to the way they were. Zariah stood at the head of the table, the sunlight catching her face as she looked out over the directors and staff. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. She took a breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Justice isn't loud," she began, her voice even and clear. "It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It's persistent. It's the truth that keeps coming back, no matter how many times you try to bury it." Evelyn Drake leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Denise nodded, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Jordan sat back, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Even Samuel Price, usually reserved, looked moved by the words. The staff along the wall listened intently, some exchanging glances, others simply taking it all in. Zariah continued, her tone steady but full of conviction. "For years, this institution has turned people away, not because they weren't qualified, but because they didn't fit a certain image. That ends now. We're here to serve everyone, to open doors that have been closed for too long." She paused, letting the message land. Real change isn't about noise. It's about action, about making sure the next person who walks through those doors is seen, heard, and given a fair chance. A hush followed, the impact settling over the room. Maya lowered her phone, the live stream ending with a flood of supportive comments. Denise wiped a tear from her cheek, whispering, "Finally." Jordan clapped softly, soon joined by others around the table. Zariah met each gaze, her presence calm and unshakable. She finished with a promise. "This is just the beginning. We're going to build something better together." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine, a new sound for a new era. Martin lingered at the doorway, shoulders hunched, clutching a folder that suddenly felt heavier than ever before. No one looked up as he paused, hoping for a final glance or word of sympathy. The directors busied themselves with new agendas, their focus already shifted to Zariah's leadership. The staff along the wall whispered quietly, their eyes sliding past Martin as if he were a stranger passing through. He stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind him with a dull click. The corridor, once a place where his footsteps commanded attention, now swallowed the sound. A junior analyst passed him without a nod, her gaze fixed on the future. Martin's reflection in the polished glass looked smaller, diminished, the authority he once wore now just an empty suit. As he made his way toward the exit, the receptionist barely acknowledged him, her hands moving briskly over her keyboard. He hesitated, waiting for some acknowledgement, but none came. Even the security guard, who used to greet him with a respectful nod, simply glanced up and returned to his post. Outside, the city moved on. People hurried past, caught up in their own lives. Martin paused on the steps, folder clutched tight, but no one stopped to ask if he was all right. The world had turned, and he was no longer at its center. He looked back at the building, the windows reflecting a new era inside, one he would not be part of. He walked away, each step heavier than the last, the weight of lost power settling in. Inside, laughter and conversation drifted through the lobby, a quiet celebration of change. Martin's exit was not marked by anger or noise but by absence, a fading presence in a place that no longer needed him. Sunlight poured through the boardroom's windows, casting bright patterns on the table where new faces now gathered. Zariah stood at the head, reviewing plans with Denise and Jordan, their energy a sharp contrast to the tension that once filled this space. The room buzzed with quiet conversation, ideas, not warnings, passing from one person to another. The old guard's absence was palpable, but it wasn't mourned. Downstairs, the lobby felt transformed. A mural of community leaders, painted in bold colors, stretched across one wall. Staff members greeted clients by name, their smiles genuine. The marble floor, once cold and unwelcoming, now reflected the movement of people who felt they belonged. Marcus, the security guard, paused to admire the mural, pride flickering in his eyes as he recognized faces he'd seen in the neighborhood for years. In her new office, Zariah met with a young entrepreneur, blueprint in hand. "We want to open a cafe," the woman said, hope clear in her voice. Zariah nodded, encouragement in her tone. "Let's see how we can help." Denise managed paperwork at a nearby desk, her laughter brightening the space. Jordan coordinated with staff, his enthusiasm infectious. The atmosphere was one of possibility and trust. Maya Lynn stopped by with her camera, snapping photos for a follow-up story. "It feels different in here," she remarked, capturing a shot of Zariah shaking hands with a client. Zariah smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and determination. "It is different, and it'll stay that way." As the day went on, the branch filled with the sounds of progress, phones ringing, printers humming, voices rising in optimism. The era of exclusion had ended, replaced by a spirit of welcome and renewal. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating faces that had long been kept in the shadows. The future, once uncertain, now looked bright and open for everyone who entered. Martin sat in the corner of a quiet cafe, his mug untouched, coffee long since gone cold. The morning sun barely reached his table, casting a dull shadow over the phone in his hand. He scrolled through news articles about the bank's transformation, each headline a reminder of the world moving on without him. "Historic change at First Meridian," one read. "New leadership ushers in the era of inclusion." His jaw tightened as he read the comments: praise for Zariah, relief from former clients, congratulations from staff who once answered him. A couple entered the cafe, their laughter bright. Martin looked up, hoping for a familiar face, but they didn't notice him. He shifted in his seat, glancing around as if searching for someone who might remember his name. No one did. The barista wiped down the counter, eyes sliding past Martin, without recognition. Even the regulars, people he'd nodded to for years, walked by without a glance. His phone buzzed with a news alert, Zariah's first community event as chair. The photo showed her surrounded by smiling neighbors, the mural of black leaders behind her. Martin's thumb hovered over the image, a mix of resentment and regret tightening his chest. He sipped his cold coffee, the bitterness lingering. Outside, a neighbor he'd known for years crossed the street rather than wave. Martin watched, the gesture small but unmistakable. He set his mug down, the clink louder than he intended. The world was moving forward, and he was left behind, a footnote in a story that no longer needed him. He scrolled again, searching for something, anything, that might restore the feeling of importance he once carried. But the screen was filled only with reminders that his time had passed. Martin sat back, the cafe's warmth lost on him, realizing that the world had learned to thrive without his approval. The bank's lobby glowed with a new energy, sunlight streaming through the tall windows and pooling on the polished floor. Where once there had been only portraits of past executives, a vibrant mural now stretched across the far wall, faces of local leaders, teachers, and small business owners painted in bold, joyful colors. Zariah stood near the entrance, greeting clients as they arrived. Her presence was calm, welcoming, the kind of leadership that made people stand a little taller. Staff moved through the space with purpose and ease. Denise chatted with a new hire, her laughter echoing off the marble. Marcus, the security guard, paused to admire the mural, tracing the outline of a familiar face with his eyes. "That's Mrs. Evans from the bakery," he said to a colleague, pride warming his tone. The colleague nodded, smiling. "Feels like home now, doesn't it?" Clients entered, some hesitantly, others with wide grins. A young mother balanced, her toddler on her hip, waving to Zariah as she approached the counter. An older man, cane in hand, stopped to study the mural, his eyes shining with recognition. "I never thought I'd see myself in a place like this," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. At the service desks, the staff treated every visitor with genuine care. No one was rushed, no one dismissed. Each question was answered, each concern heard. The marble floor, once cold and intimidating, now reflected the movement of a community that finally felt welcome. Zariah watched the scene unfold, her heart full. She caught Denise's eye across the room, and they shared a quiet nod, an understanding that this was what they'd fought for. The bank was no longer just a building. It was a gathering place, a symbol of what could change when people refused to accept exclusion as the norm. As sunlight bathed the mural and laughter filled the air, the lobby became a living testament to belonging. The faces on the wall, and those walking beneath them, knew they finally had a place here. Zariah's office door was never closed. Young entrepreneurs, students, and community members filtered in and out, each carrying dreams as fragile as they were fierce. She listened to every idea, some polished, some scribbled on napkins, her encouragement steady and real. "Tell me what you want to build," she'd say, leaning forward, her attention undivided. A nervous teenager entered, clutching a folder. "I want to start a tutoring center," he stammered. Zariah smiled, nodding for him to continue. "What's stopping you?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then admitted, "No one's ever helped me before." Zariah's answer was simple. "You're not alone here. Let's figure it out together." She reviewed his plan, making notes, offering advice, and connecting him with resources. The relief on his face was unmistakable, a door finally opening where so many had been closed. Denise managed the schedule, her voice warm as she greeted each visitor. "Ms. Caldwell will see you now," she'd say, ushering people in with a reassuring smile. The office buzzed with quiet hope, the kind that grows when people feel seen and supported. Marcus stopped by during his break, sharing a laugh with Zariah about the mural and the changes sweeping through the bank. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said. Zariah nodded, pride in her eyes. "It's what we always deserved." Throughout the day, Zariah stamped approvals, offered guidance, and celebrated every small victory. She kept a jar on her desk, dropping in a marble for every business launched, every loan granted, every life changed. By evening, the jar was nearly full, a silent record of progress. As the sun set, Zariah leaned back in her chair, watching the last visitor leave. The office, filled with the echoes of dreams and determination, felt alive. Her open door was more than a policy. It was a promise that hope and opportunity would always have a place here. The lobby was filled with applause as Mr. Otis stepped forward, silver scissors trembling in his hand. For 3 decades he'd arrived before sunrise, sweeping floors and fixing what others ignored. Today he stood in front of the mural. A crowd gathered to honor him, not as a janitor, but as a pillar of the community. Zariah introduced him, her voice warm. "Mr. Otis has kept this place running for 30 years. He's more than staff. He's family." Denise handed him the ribbon, her eyes shining with respect. Marcus, standing nearby, clapped him on the back. "You earned this," he said, a rare smile breaking through. Mr. Otis looked at the faces around him, colleagues, neighbors, even former clients who remembered his kindness. He cleared his throat, voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," he admitted. "For a long time I was just the man in the background, but now I see my story on that wall. I see all of us." With a deep breath, he snipped the ribbon, the sound sharp and final. The crowd erupted in cheers, some wiping away tears. Zariah hugged him, whispering, "Thank you for never giving up on us." Mr. Otis nodded, his pride unmistakable. The janitor's cart, now retired and polished, stood beside the entrance, a symbol of years spent unseen, now honored and remembered. As the celebration continued, Mr. Otis lingered by the mural, tracing the painted faces with his eyes. "We built this together," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. The staff gathered for photos, laughter and gratitude filling the space. For the first time, Mr. Otis felt truly seen, not just for his work, but for his legacy. The ribbon cutting was more than a ceremony. It was a long overdue acknowledgement. 30 years of quiet service, finally honored in one unforgettable moment. Maya. Lynn stood at the podium, the weight of the Journalism Award heavy in her hands. The room was filled with reporters, community leaders, and friends who had followed her relentless coverage of the bank's transformation. Her voice was steady as she accepted the honor. This story belongs to those who saw it first, the people whose voices were ignored for too long. She glanced at the audience, eyes shining with quiet pride. Behind her, a slideshow played, images of protests, community meetings, and Zariah's steady rise. Maya's words echoed the struggles and victories, the moments when truth pierced through silence. She spoke of resilience, of the power of storytelling to challenge injustice and inspire change. Journalism is not just about facts. It's about giving voice to those who have been silenced. In the crowd, Zariah smiled, her eyes moist. Denise clapped softly, while Jordan exchanged a proud glance with Maya. The award was more than a trophy. It was a symbol of the impact their combined efforts had made. Maya's pen had uncovered the hidden biases, the buried complaints, and the quiet courage that fueled a movement. After the ceremony, Maya received a text from Zariah. "You gave us the light." She smiled, knowing the fight was far from over, but that this recognition was a milestone. The newsroom buzzed with renewed energy, reporters inspired to keep digging, keep telling the stories that mattered. Maya's acceptance speech was a reminder that truth, once revealed, could not be ignored. It was a victory not just for her, but for every person who had dared to demand justice. The trophy gleamed under the spotlight, but it was the stories behind it, the voices, the faces, the unyielding spirit that truly shone. As the applause faded, Maya felt a deep sense of purpose. The pen had won this round, but the journey continued, fueled by the unwavering belief that stories could change the world. The scent of fresh bread drifted through Tasha's bakery, wrapping every customer in warmth as soon as they stepped inside. She moved behind the counter with practiced ease, sliding golden loaves from the oven, her cheeks flushed with pride. The framed loan approval hung by the register, a quiet badge of honor. "They said I couldn't do it," she told a regular, slicing a thick piece of sourdough. "But here we are." A little girl pressed her face to the glass display, eyes wide at the rows of pastries. Tasha leaned over, grinning. "Want to try the cinnamon roll? It's my favorite." The girl nodded, shy but excited, and Tasha handed her a warm treat, winking at the mother who mouthed a grateful thank you. Denise stopped in on her lunch break, waving from the doorway. "Place looks amazing, Tasha." Tasha beamed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Couldn't have done it without you all." She glanced at the approval letter, remembering the day Zariah stamped it. That yes changed everything. Customers lingered, chatting over coffee, the bakery humming with life and laughter. Marcus dropped by, picking up a loaf for his family. "You're famous now," he teased, nodding at the local newspaper article taped to the wall. Tasha laughed, shaking her head. I just want people to feel welcome here. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, Tasha paused to take it all in. The full tables, the happy faces, the sense of belonging she'd created. She thought back to the days of closed doors and polite rejections, to the feeling of being dismissed before she'd even begun. Now, every sale, every smile, every crumb was proof that the system could be changed, one small victory at a time. The bell above the door jingled, and Tasha greeted the next customer, her heart light. This was more than a bakery. It was a testament to perseverance, community, and the sweet taste of dreams finally realized. A young woman stood at Zariah's desk, hands trembling as she passed over her business proposal. She glanced around the bustling branch, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. I've never done this before, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I always thought this place wasn't for people like me. Zariah smiled gently, motioning for her to sit. Tell me about your idea, she encouraged, her tone warm and inviting. As the woman described her vision, a tutoring center for neighborhood kids, her confidence grew. Zariah listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and jotting notes. Denise peeked in, offering a reassuring nod, while Marcus paused by the door, giving a thumbs up. The woman's nerves eased, replaced by hope. When she finished, Zariah stamped the application with a bold, "Approved." The woman stared at the paper, disbelief and joy mingling on her face. Thank you, she breathed, tears welling in. Her eyes. I never thought someone would give me a chance. Zariah reached across the desk, offering her hand. You belong here. We all do. This is your bank, your community. The woman shook her hand, her grip steady now. I won't let you down, she promised, determination shining through. Zariah smiled, pride swelling in her chest. I know you won't. Now go show them what you can do. As the woman left, she paused in the lobby, looking up at the mural of local leaders. For the first time, she saw herself reflected in the faces on the wall. Other clients watched her, some nodding in encouragement, others inspired by her courage. Zariah watched from her office, heart full. The promise she'd made was more than words. It was a commitment to every person who walked through those doors. The bank was no longer a fortress. It was a home, a place where everyone belonged, and every dream had a chance to grow. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the lobby, Zariah stood alone before the mural, her reflection mingling with the painted faces of leaders and dreamers. The day's noise faded, replaced by a quiet that felt both sacred and electric. She traced a finger along the wall, remembering every closed door, every no, every moment she'd been told to wait her turn. She spoke softly, her words meant for the mural, the empty lobby, and herself. Change doesn't roar. It whispers. It's the steady voice that refuses to be drowned out, the hand that holds the door open for the next in line. Her voice grew steadier. We didn't come this far to leave anyone behind. We built this together, and we'll keep building. One approval, one handshake, one promise at a time. Outside, the city's lights flickered on, illuminating the street and the faces passing by. Inside, the bank glowed with a new warmth. Denise lingered near the entrance, listening quietly, her eyes shining with pride. Marcus locked up for the night, pausing to nod at Zariah, a silent thank you in his gesture. Zariah turned from the mural, her heart full of hope and resolve. She walked through the lobby, her footsteps echoing not with loneliness, but with the promise of more to come. The world outside was changing, slowly but surely, and she was determined to be part of every step forward. The camera pulled back, sunlight streaming through the glass, illuminating the faces of those who'd once been kept in the shadows. Zariah's whispered conviction lingered in the air, a quiet thunder promising that justice would never again be silenced.